So good afternoon and welcome to the very first CoLab talk. I am your moderator and host this afternoon, Benjamin Howard, part of the support specialist team here in the CoLab. And this is the first of a monthly series of events. Please tell your friends. So we hopefully have more folks join us next time, but this fall it's going to be on the first Thursday of every month. And we're going to tackle topics that are looking at what's new, what's exciting, and what's challenging about the new technologies that drive our world. The topic this month is privacy and the personal device revolution. The way these events are going to work is we're going to start first with a short video that gives some context so that we all have a shared context about the topic. After that, there's going to be a facilitated conversation between our audience members and our expert panel. Speaking of which, we couldn't do this event without our expert panel. They're all donating their time to be here, so thank you to our panel for being here. I want to introduce everybody. Going alphabetically. First we have Mr. Barry J. Bailey. He's a professor, chair, and digital projects librarian here at Johnson County Community College with 15 years experience working in academic libraries and information science. His interests include digital privacy and ethics, higher education, preservation, and open resources. Prior to joining JCCC in 2008, Professor Bailey served as assistant professor of library administration at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he earned both his bachelor's degree in English and a master's degree in library and information science. Our second guest panelist, Helen, can you help me with your last name, please?
Bebre-Amlak.
One more time.
It's actually Helen Bebre-Amlak.
Thank you. Helen Bebre-Amlak, I still butchered it. Thank you, Helen, is a PhD candidate at UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, in computer networking and communication systems. From the industry side, she has worked for Sprint, IBM, and Level 3 Communications as a senior software engineer. Her research interests include reliability and security in software-defined networks, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. Research work at UMKC has included work on Kansas City's open data portal, validating that no personally identifiable information or sensitive personal information is published openly. In addition to her current graduate work at UMKC, Helen holds a Master's of Business Administration from Washburn University and a Master's in Telecommunications Management from Webster University. And finally, Patrick Lafferty. Associate Professor Patrick T. Lafferty is an award-winning mass communicator specializing in media production and content management. His research focuses on the democratic impact of media consolidation and conglomeration, community journalism, implementations of technology for news dissemination, evolution of the news industry, as well as the ever-changing internet journalism landscape. He earned bachelor's degrees in business administration and political science from the University of Kansas, followed by graduate work at the University of Kansas School of Law and a Master of Science in Journalism and Mass Communications from the William Allen White School of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Kansas. After teaching 4 semesters at KU, Professor Lafferty joined the faculty here at Johnson County Community College 9 years ago. He is the author of Implications of Ownership, Applying the Propaganda Model to Media Ownership Theory, and when his schedule permits, he consults with nonprofits, startups, and Fortune 500 industry leaders. So thank you again to our expert panel for being here today. So this is more dramatic with a larger audience, but who here has a cell phone? Presumably all of us, yeah? Okay, and it's, unfortunately. And how many of it's a smartphone? Yeah? Yes. Okay. Okay, so they've kind of become these ubiquitous devices though. Almost everybody has one. We do lots of things with them. I don't know about you, but if I had to pick between whether I was going to have my wallet left at home on a given day or my cell phone left at home on a given day, I would much rather leave my wallet. I've just gotten so used to having it, right? And a couple of weeks ago, I was in Chicago, needed a cab, and the cabs at the O'Hare International Airport use a particular app. And so I'm downloading and clicking through all of the privacy things, going, yes, 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 you can have my location, yes, you can have my firstborn, whatever it is that you're trying to do, because I wanted a cab, right? Has anybody else kind of quickly clicked through maybe didn't read every line of the privacy agreement as you were installing an app? You don't have to admit to that. That's okay. Your conscience will hold you accountable. But anyway, that's certainly something that I've done. But I started to wonder, okay, so what happens with all of that data that I just gave up so that I could get in the cab? To look at that, that's part of what our expert TED speaker is going to address in her talk today. Madhumita Murgia is a European technology correspondent for the Financial Times, former reporter and editor for Wired UK and the Daily Telegraph. Her education, she has a BA in biological sciences and master's degrees in clinical immunology and science, health, and environmental reporting. She also became curious about what happens to all of this data that we give away as part of just using our cell phones on a daily basis, and decided to do some investigative reporting to find out. So our video is going to share the results of her investigative journalism on this, and then we're going to have a conversation with our panel. Before we jump into questions, there's a piece that our speaker didn't cover that I think is important to mention in this conversation, and that's data breaches. So not only, of course, are these companies collecting so much information about us, but of course we just had last week, Facebook, 220 million users were compromised. So not only are we collecting all this data, but clearly the companies that are collecting it still have issues with keeping it safe. So that's another piece of this that we should consider. So I'm going to hand this off to you. Okay, so first, before we get into our structured questions or anything, just thoughts, impressions from either our expert panel or our guests in the audience. Yes, sir.
It kind of reminds me of Minority Report by Steven Spielberg, kind of along that lines, except for that's not crime, it's data. Like they use the information to kind of predict what your next move is going to be, and I think that's where the profitability is.
Right. So in that story, there were these three like psychic that could predict your future, which, based on what we just saw, is probably not necessary. If we've got enough data points, we can just predict it without, a science fiction element, right? But a very similar concept. Yeah. Other thoughts?
So there's a whole lot to unpack from that. I think the first thing that I'd kind of push back at from her talk is that targeted ads aren't dangerous. I think that advertising in general kind of forces one's focus in one direction. So a small example that may seem harmless, Spotify, they recently found out that the information it's collecting is basically everything down to like the type of headphones you're listening on. You're like, well, okay, maybe that they pass that on and someone's advertising Beats, and so now you're going to see ads to upgrade your headphones. Well, that's fine. But let's say you're searching on, the WebMD app that she mentioned for a particular disease and the symptoms you're being treated for maybe, and you start seeing ads for competing medicines, and whatever agency you take over yourself for your own health may detract you from a different disease, and instead may have you seek out different treatments for what you're currently being treated for. So, the way it may trigger how you think about yourself with targeted ads can be very damaging, I think. The other part I'd point out is, this idea of maybe having companies pay for you to give consent for your data to be used or sold off. A great theory, but if you think about what that's really going to do, it's going to cut out smaller businesses from entering markets where there may or may not be legitimate reasons for doing that. And the only people that will be able to do that are probably some of the biggest offenders, the larger established companies like Facebook, et cetera. So I don't think that's a very good solution from my point of view.
I think that's a great point. Relatedly, and a story that some folks may be familiar with, there was just a story came out about a new series of coffee shops that are being opened around college campuses around the United States, where you may not pay with money, students pay with their data. In order, they get free food, free coffee, can hang out, free Wi-Fi, in exchange for signing away their data. And so another way of commodifying and taking advantage of college students who tend to be broke anyway, and then signing away this information, thinking, sure, in exchange for a croissant, that sounds like a good deal right now, but students not necessarily understanding what they're doing. So we're already commodifying in new ways people's data and how it may be used.
If I can respond to that, excuse me. I think it's important for organizations such as colleges and universities to take a proactive stance to make sure that they are not offering services like that, so that they are taking a prominent role in protecting the data of students, not just because it may be legislatively required, like through FERPA or something like that, but because it is the wrong thing to do to encourage that kind of behavior. We simply, as a society, cannot sustain what is going on right now. And to go back to the video just briefly, there are a lot of holes even in what she suggested there as remedies, and things have gotten significantly worse than the taping of that video as well. So, for instance, you mentioned the Facebook breach, but just today, Bloomberg reported on the compromise of virtually every server that's being used around the world. That the hardware itself has been compromised on many, many, many motherboards, somewhere between 75 and 90% of motherboards out there. We know that every one of these personal devices that we're referring to is inherently broken and is therefore functionally garbage as far as security goes because of the hardware problems that exist that have been reported in the preceding couple of years. So there is simply no way to secure these devices. It is impossible to secure these devices. And so we continue to perpetuate this system without fully addressing the concerns. She mentioned permissions on apps. We just discovered within the past couple weeks, it was publicly reported, but within the past couple months, it's been known probably that permissions that are listed in apps are entirely incomplete in what they're actually making publicly available from your devices. So sensors like the barometer in your phone, sensors like the spatial orientation of your phone, things that tell the individuals that know how to look at that data, whether you're sitting, standing, walking, moving, etc. That kind of information is all leaking out of these devices, and there is no way for consumers to know that that's happening, and there is no way for us to prevent that from happening short of getting rid of these devices, which does not seem to be a societal reality that we're going to be able to make happen anytime soon, because people are so addicted to the access to information, and that's really what we're looking at here. So there's a lot that needs to be taken into consideration in this arena that is so counter to the worldviews that are prevalent today, counter to the positions that people are taking in their own pursuit of privacy or not pursuing privacy, that don't fully account for the realities that are known, that aren't making it through the noise of everything else that's going on in our world these days. So people can't really make informed choices, and they can't offer meaningful consent. And that is a real issue that is going to be a big part of our future conversations about these, I think.
My big question is that the younger generation, the students, I don't think they have a clear understanding of what privacy is, and that now with all these devices available to kids that are 13 and under, they share any information. They're an open book. So unless we start out with, of course, we've already failed there. So unless we start out with even the younger ones to educate them what privacy is, I don't think we're beyond that. And number two is that internet has never been about privacy. It's been about connecting. So now mixing that, connecting globally with people that have no clear understanding of what privacy is, it creates a whole new world. So security has never been part of internet. It's never been, that's a whole new issue that's never been touched still to this day. There's a lot of companies that are suffering because of security issue. I know Level 3 was one of them when they were down for many days, and that actually impacted a lot of big companies. So, and also now we have newer and newer devices available, IoT being one of them. That opens up another gate for security breach. So that's where I leave.
And I think you raised a really interesting point, right? That folks who grew up as digital natives grew up with this context of openness, right? That was the norm that they've established, as opposed to a more conventional idea of what we think of as privacy. And I think about what our TED speaker talked about in terms of being empowered by information. And I wonder particularly after what we've just talked about here in your comment, Professor Lafferty, about what we might, is there ways to meaningfully protect ourselves, or how might we become more informed consumers of this economy that we find ourselves in?
So there are ways we can protect ourselves, but we are mitigating the harm. We are not removing the harm. Things like, well, here's just the one that I always start with. You should never send another SMS text message in your life. Stop that immediately. There is only one good, viable option available right now on the marketplace, and that's the app called Signal Private Messenger. I have no ownership stake in that organization. Let me be clear on that. But yes, so I mean, there are things we can do to mitigate, but not solve. But 2 points to follow up on what was just mentioned here. The problem with the complete lack of data protection that we've really seen evidenced in recent years is one that there is what would seem to be a negative point, but is actually a silver lining, and that's the concept of data rot. This data is not perpetually useful. And so once it does reach a certain age, and that is going to vary piece of data per piece of data and, organization by organization, but once it reaches a certain point, it is no longer useful to the people that hold that data for things other than perhaps blackmail purposes. And so with that in mind, if we cut off the tap, if we stop giving that data, then we can improve the future. So there is hope in that. And then the other thing is we need to to your point about security on the internet, you're right. It's always going to be this thing that's been tacked on because the internet was built to share information. That was the point of the internet. But what we just saw this week, and it was great news to hear, is that the father of the World Wide Web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, is now openly discussing the fact that he's been working for the past 9 months or so on building a new decentralized internet. And I really think that that is the future of all of these devices. It must be decentralized, so you can't have data warehouses like Facebook, like Cambridge Analytica, like other organizations like that. And by the way, Cambridge Analytica, within the last 48 hours, has been criminally pursued now in the UK. So they're now, it's not just a data breach, it is now a criminal action that they're being pursued for. So we do see incremental progress like that. We do see little glimmers of hope, but overall, we should not be celebrating the state of affairs right now.
And since we are talking about personal devices in this, one thing that's been absent from this discussion that I know we've kicked around before, Professor Lafferty, is where's the hardware? Where's the hardware that doesn't come with your geolocation tracking capability or your, sense of space, or the ability, or why do I need a front-facing camera? Why can't I get a good quality smartphone that has these out? Or why can't I have a biometrics tracker, a Fitbit, without the ability to broadcast that signal to somewhere else? I mean, and if I do have one, if that is available, why isn't it the cool, sexy, fancy one that, where's that market? I think if there's any hope in this conversation beyond, obsolescence, digital rot, there's the idea that if there's a market for these devices, then maybe it will happen. And if I could just real quick touch on Benjamin, first of all, great job with the slides and shouting out their licensing, fantastic job. But to the point you made, about trading data for food, basically. Think of who that targets. I mean, yeah, college students are poor. Okay, that's kind of that goes across the board for a lot of them. But the really disadvantaged people who would be willing to do that, not on an off, like, oh, well, I'll take that Big Mac, here's some info, but the people who are like, this is the only way I'm getting a Big Mac, that targets, that trade for data targets them. It also targets license agreements with phone plans, just ways for people to even have an inroad into technology. The way that it targets people who are disadvantaged, that trade for information is unethical, just really troubling to me. So sorry to get back to that, but it's just bouncing around in my brain. So.
I appreciate you actually going, as a higher ed professional and an educator, that the a piece that we've touched on a little bit here, but when we think about this, there's also an equity piece, right, of who can afford what technology and who's likely to give up, or who's going to be in a position where they're going to decide, yeah, I'm willing to give up this data because I'm not going to get the Big Mac any other way. And those tend to be the students or the members of our community who have the least resources, the least power, the least voice. We're taking advantage of a group that is already at risk. So I'm glad you make that point. I think it's important. Do we have any questions from our audience members or comments before? And do we have, okay, sure.
I'll wait for the audience, okay.
Anybody? Okay, go ahead.
I just quickly wanted to say that your story about your taxi adventure in Chicago
Yes.
is horrifying. Okay, from an access to public services perspective, you should not have to sacrifice your personal data in order to get a taxi. You should. Parking in Kansas City. You should. There are so many instances of this. The list is a mile long, and we should not have to sacrifice. We should not have to be sitting on this panel in order to understand the ramifications of what it means to get a cab at the airport in Chicago. And yet, that is the reality that we're facing. We are not being given choice. Now, I was not there. I don't know exactly all the details of your Chicago situation. But if I can't walk off a plane and get in a cab, that is a loss. That is a loss to the commons. That is a loss to the notion of public goods, even if it is a private cab service. And so that's something that we need to be pushing back on as well. We see so many societal issues in the physical space, but those same issues follow us into cyberspace. And so we can't separate that. We cannot, we need to be thinking about digital civil rights in the same context that we're thinking about everyday human civil rights. And they are part and parcel of the same concepts, and we need to be defending them just as vigorously there as we are in the real world.
I wonder if our panel has any news outlets, resources. What would you recommend for folks who want to be more aware about what's going on in this space, want to be aware of what's happening and some of the updates that you've shared? What kind of outlets or resources should we be paying attention to?
You can follow me on Twitter.
Okay, so we have an endorsement for Professor Lafferty's Twitter, and he retweeted this event, so thank you. So are there other, so in terms of, are there major news organizations that you would say get things right more often than not? Are there, or is it really such a complicated field that you have to develop a level of expertise in order to be equipped?
I think the answer to all of those questions is probably yes. So I do think that there is a level of expertise. You have to have read enough about this to see the broad picture of what is and is not available to us. There are news outlets that do a pretty good job. There are individual reporters that do a really good job at some of those outlets. I didn't bring a list to name drop everybody here, but again, when I suggested my Twitter feed, that was not because of my thoughts necessarily, but I do try to present a lot of different points of view and bring issues to light that are not getting enough coverage there. And so that's, again, a value of that medium as a concept, but there are still a lot of problems even within Twitter and how they manage data and how they manage their networks and things of that nature that are concerning. So there is no good single source solution to that piece of it, to that question. I don't know if either of you do, feel free to disagree, but there are, it's an amalgamation of these points of light coming in from different areas of the web, different areas, different perspectives, and those put together really do give us a big picture of a entity, I think is probably the best way to refer to what we're dealing with now, that is not working for us. It's working near us, perhaps right in your pocket as we speak, right? But that is not necessarily what we want as humans out of this interaction with technology. And so we need to have better user experiences, and that means including privacy and security and accessibility and all of these other issues we've kind of alluded to in that process, in that design process from the initiation of it, not as an add-on after the fact.
I would also say, maybe just to add on to that, if you have a smartphone, if you have Apple, any one of those updated devices, you want to read detail on what you're getting when you're signing up a product or you're buying a product. Another point I want to make about privacy is that with all this new technology that's taking place right now, especially with IoT, all our devices in our home, like the thermostat, everything has already its Internet of Things. So it's sending those data out to a cloud. So, and which registers your habits? You know, when do you come in? You set your thermostat when you come into the house, a certain temperature when you're there. When you're watching TV, when you're watching recorded channels, all those things, all those data are being collected. And those are being used actually to categorize us and to be able to target, advertise for what you need. When you log in to browse on your Gmail or on, how do you browse again? When you Google it, I forgot, Google it, right?
Right. A company name that's a verb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Immediately after that, you're being followed. So whatever you browse, you're being advertised, targeted advertised. All those things, I think, as long as we use those products, we are part of it. So that means we have accepted it. So the only way you can go back trying to get your privacy is, are you willing to live without those products? That's the question.
And that's a fair point. And to Professor Lafferty's question, I probably could have found another way to get in the cab, but it was the least effort, right? And that's what they count on a lot of this, right? That it's, okay, what's the most convenient, fastest way to do this? Because I don't really care how I get to my final destination, just that I get there. But for the convenience, what am I giving up in exchange for that convenience? And what I'm hearing from all three of you is this idea of it starts with awareness and understanding of what we're giving away, followed by then a demand from the users for better privacy, for the kind of devices where there has to be a market, right, for a device that doesn't have a forward-facing camera. And so it sounds like there's this concept of we've got to educate people, and then there also has to be some demand, some push from the users to get product makers and designers and that kind of stuff to provide more secure devices. Is that fair?
True.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to cross in front again. Comments, other comments or thoughts before we jump into a couple of our scripted questions here? I knew as soon as I walked away. No, it's a good. Thank you.
I remember, and I'm dating myself, the main company that used to always collect information to me was always Sears. Sears was always like, they had the loyalty program. It was with the Sears and Roebuck, and they would always gather your information, and they would send out these certain catalogs to you in the mail. And then, if you were like, a certain white day, they kind of watched your pattern of interaction and buying at their store. And I think that's where all of this whole data kind of gathering and kind of warehousing and stuff is right now coming from. That need to kind of find out what you need, what do you need, when you need it right now, and we're going to send it to you right now. We're going to have it right now. You got to do is hit this button. Well, it used to be a catalog back then. So I think that with that whole situation with the data, I think it's not so much being intrusive, but I think it started off as a need to try to fill a niche and go after a targeted market. And I think that they saw that it was responsive. They got profitability off of it, and then it just kind of blew up, and it just went over all sources and levels and stuff like that. So.
And thank you for sharing. That's a good point, right? This came from, companies have always been trying to collect information about us to more effectively market, to more effectively feel, okay, whatever product that is that we need. And of course, information collection doesn't have to be nefarious to be dangerous. So this idea of, for perfectly from a business standpoint, legitimate reasons that still can create privacy and potentially even safety or real issues of liberty and decision making. So. We're still talking. I'm just getting back over to that. Yeah.
I would argue that those are not legitimate reasons. I would argue that the business community is doing things that are illegitimate, and they are harming us directly as a result of that. So we often make excuses for the business community because, come on, Amazon, Google, Apple, they're not doing nefarious things on purpose. I beg to differ. They read the same articles I read. They have inside data that I don't have, and they know what they are doing. So there is absolutely no room to give them any leeway on these issues at this point anymore. They are well informed, and they have not taken the decisive action necessary to protect their customers from these situations. So let's be cautious about giving them any credit for doing the right thing.
And that's a good clarification. And my comment was meant more of where it maybe started with Sears and how it's grown. But there certainly is this question of corporate citizenship now, of people who have these entities that have so much power and so much influence You mentioned it as well, Helen, the idea that Google is now both a company and a verb. That's an incredible amount of influence for one company or companies like it to wield. So that's a fair point. That's a good clarification.
And we also perpetuate these organizations by turning their names into verbs. So,
Right.
for instance, there are other very reasonable and good search engines that work that are not Google. DuckDuckGo, for instance, that would be my strong recommendation. Again, cut off the tap to the data. You do not have to lose user experience in doing so, and you can greatly improve the overall footprint of your personal data point, but also you can showcase to other people that there are better ways, and we can get away from the verbification of some of these organizations.
Okay. So that's one great recommendation. DuckDuckGo is an alternative, which using DuckDuckGo, if you haven't, your search results are even different. And it's interesting to see you do get a different experience of the internet when you get into a more privacy-focused browser. So Helen, please
And
go
you
ahead.
don't, you don't get followed, so you don't get those.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say is we had a previous discussion about how Facebook users are actually, the youngest user you could be is 13 years old in Facebook. But the advertising starts there. So those users, those advertisement doesn't say, of course you have to be 18 to legally sign up for things, but to be bombarded with all these ad that requires you to sign up for things to the 13 years old, is that really fair and legal? So that's what we're letting Facebook do to our children.
That's a really fair question. And of course, there were stories that probably all of us knew from a few years ago before there were more controls put on like app purchases, where you would have like a 13, 14-year-old who had gotten on mom or dad's device and spent $50,000 over the course of several months or whatever, because, right, the ads were targeted and they're not prepared to make those decisions. My background's in mental health, and so we know that we're not sure we should, if we're talking about mental health developmentally, people aren't really adults probably until their early 20s. And so, yeah, at 13 years old, to be sure, with parental permission, you're allowed to get on the internet. And I wonder at what an entire lifetime of ad tracking, by the time that person's in their 70s or 80s, boy, that's a whole lifetime of data that somebody has on that person. We're going to know them really well, and that's kind of scary for that person, which is most of us. Professor Bailey, you had something.
Oh, no, I'm ready to move to the next question to spare you all an anti-capitalist raid.
Okay.
Things were just about to get interesting.
Okay, so, and this first question here, and maybe for this audience may not be a great question, but in thinking about starting, what are some concrete things that folks could maybe do, or how would they start thinking about the way that they interact with their device? I wanted to pose the question of, for everybody's favorite app that they use, is there any amount of privacy protection or intrusion that would change the way that people use that particular app? Given our audience and who's here, I kind of want to ask the group, what kind of information would you like users to see in sort of so they can make a more informed decision about, okay, how much am I giving away or protecting at this point? You talked, I can't remember who talked about a lot of the data leakage that's happening right now. So I kind of wonder that issue of how do we help folks make this decision?
I'll say that, my favorite app is 80s pro wrestling game. And it doesn't really collect much information, surprisingly. But it does have opportunities to, say, connect to Apple's Game Center, just like a very basic level of, we'll keep track of your progress, but you're also signing in and allowing other people to see it. Luckily now it lets me not do that if I want to use it. But to spare you all another rant, this one about wrestling, I'll say that as a librarian, I'm very interested about information that's out there, how people get it, how people search it and find it, and also the context in which it's presented. And to go back to Spotify and kind of think of that as an app, knowing how much data they collect and the informed decisions they try to make on it affects my ability to reach out. I'm a fan of a style of music called black metal, and there is a very nefarious angle that a small portion of bands take up, which is this sort of National Socialist bent. Horrifying stuff. But I'm concerned about how people might discover black metal within Spotify. Knowing that they keep track of me, knowing that they have a picture of who I am, it makes me hesitant to sort of, do a search for bands that I know to see if they're being marketed and passed off to other users. People should know that these bands are bad. And if Spotify's actively cataloging them, they should be made aware. That said, if I make the decision to search for them, or even to listen to see how horrible the content is and, try to make recommendations back to Spotify, then there's probably a piece of my, profile that they have that says, Barry Bailey loves metal, maybe racist. And I don't need that in my life. So if I knew that they were not tracking that data in that way, it might make me actually a more productive user for them to highlight problematic areas around their own app. So.
You don't have a favorite app? I've already mentioned my favorite app. I think Signal is one of the most important apps that's out there today. There are perhaps better technologies. It is still reliant on some dubious technologies that come from Google that make it easier to use, but also still keep you dependent on that private entity there. So that's of concern. But overall, I would say that's one of the most important apps people could have on their phone.
Okay. Helen?
I don't have a smartphone.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. No, that's, and do you not because of privacy concerns?
Yes. I work for a telephone company. So my phone is 13 years old, older than my kids, of course. Yeah.
Well, and I actually think that raises an interesting point that to what Professor Bailey shared of if by interacting with these systems, we sometimes may be giving up information or creating associations that we don't want. And so there's a good point to be made. There is a way to live in the modern world and decide I'm not going to have this particular piece of information or device available. So knowing that by just engaging with some of these systems, we may create questionable outcomes for ourselves. It's good to know that that's an option.
Just to add on that, earlier you said that if you were to leave your wallet or your phone, you would rather leave your wallet. Me, I would rather not have my phone.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
No, please.
I've seen that there's a big trend going on with like people going to analog because of this data. Analog, I guess, flip phones, non-smartphones. I guess I don't think this is smart, but it is. But I think that like a lot of people, because of that whole thing where people breaching and I guess can access your email and credit cards and stuff like that, they've been like some of the famous athletes and stars have been going to flip analog now. So there's no way to breach that?
And we are at about 5 o'clock, and I want to respect everybody's time, so this will be the last response we do.
Because we need to answer that question.
Yeah, please
we were
do.
talking about
Please
this
do.
ahead of time, but flip phones are not secure either. They are permanently broken as well. So they offer different levels of security or different types of security because you won't have, for instance, a keylogger on a flip phone. That's not, and when I say flip phone, I should say a non-digital phone, what we're talking about there, because there are flip phones that are smartphones as well. But that technology, the SIM card manufacturers have been compromised. The entire supply chain is compromised. So you should not feel that moving to an analog device or a flip phone or a clamshell phone or anything that is antiquated technology is actually going to create security or privacy for you. Those all can be flipped on to be open microphones at the touch of a button, just like smartphones can. So keep that in mind. But this touches on an issue that we certainly don't have time to get into right now, but threat modeling. We need to understand what the threat is to us as individuals or to us in our lot in life as compared to the generic threat that these devices face. And so that will hopefully be something we might talk about in a future event or something like that. But look into that threat model.
Yeah, another reason about the flip phone is, of course, I'm not talking about, my phone is 13-year-old, so the devices now are totally different than what they were making back then. But you don't put your credit card information on a flip phone. I mean, you need to have a smartphone. So all your personal information are loaded in the smartphone. So that is one of the reasons why I don't have a smartphone too.
Yeah, just to conclude, the types of access at your fingertips and the temptation to use and the types of functions you can accomplish are different. But yeah, there are still ways to interact with them nefariously.
So I think our maybe three takeaways here are: one, that there's hardware issues that are fundamentally flawed that make a lot of our devices vulnerable. So that's just a reality we need to know about. Knowing that, though, our two recommendations: one would be the Signal app as a way of communicating that's more secure, DuckDuckGo as a better web search opportunity, and then also just reading up on what's happening in this space so that we can be more informed consumers. Is that a fair summary of our?
Don't upgrade unless you know what to sign up.
Don't upgrade. Okay, and making those decisions of, okay, what are the consequences when we make upgrades, we make changes? We're giving away something for all of those.
And then just an overall understanding of what consent means, both from consumers and from the people providing services.
All right, well, I want to thank again our expert panel. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our audience for being here today. And again, we'll have, thank you. We're still developing topics and stuff for next semester, so maybe we can come back to this and continue in this. But our next talk will be on November 1st, and we're going to be looking at applications of video processing and motion capture technology. So thanks again for everybody for being here.